Without further ado, our two hosts. My wife has left me.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Directorpiece Theater, where your two favorite directors from the website, which must not be named, meet to talk about your favorite movies and the artistry of crafting said movies. I am one of your directors, Adam Ganser, and with me is my favorite co-host,
Abe, continually doing his bit that he always has done, and now it's canon. It's Abe Epperson. I'm also a director. Nice to meet you.
refusing to cooperate with my segues, just pivoting right off the rails right away. I love it.
Yes.
Classic. That's why we're your favorites.
That's how you're. Because he's on point and I'm a dick. All right.
I just like this. I like this bit of being favorites. So I'm going to keep bringing that up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Keep bringing it up, dude.
Yeah. So I happen to have seen quite a few movies this weekend.
Yeah?
And yeah, I wonder how it will influence our conversation today, because many of them are actually period pieces. I watched several period pieces today, but this is your episode with your theory. So do you want to introduce it?
Yeah. I don't know what the title is going to exactly be, but my argument is basically this. The 2001 film A Knight's Tale,
I love it already. I'm so pumped
starring
already.
Heath Ledger, is an anachronistic film that just means a story that is being told that takes old-timey stuff, like take anything, like a scene, dialogue, clothes, etc., and updates it to modern sensibilities. Now, there's been a lot of anachronistic films, and it's less of a theory and more of an opinion, but I want to explain why and feel like I've brought some research that if you follow me, you might agree
For
or
sure.
open up a dialogue, is that A Knight's Tale is the best anachronistic film.
I love it so hard. I love it.
And I want to
great.
explain why. All right.
Yeah.
So,
Can I briefly just point out, I just want to make one grad school point. Do you mind if I make a
Sure.
grad school point?
Sure.
So I think it's fair to say, if the audience is already sort of like, well, if they're already dubious, all films are to some degree anachronistic, because it's impossible to make a movie that isn't influenced by the time in which you make it. Right? Like, I think you would agree with that, right? Just philosophically.
yeah. Just like how, like, right now
Right.
is anachronistic to right now.
No, that's true.
Like I said it a little bit later. So the moment of the later, you know what I'm saying.
Of course. Like, whenever we make a
Time
period,
is a forward march.
it's a flat circle and meaningless. No, but so
Yes.
like, for instance, last year the best picture of the year was Green Book, which, in my opinion, not a great movie. But I think one of the reasons why that movie sort of ascended to the heights of Oscar is because it was an easy way to talk about race problems that we're interested in this culture right now, but in
Yeah,
a safer context. And it clearly needed to be back in the past because they don't want to make Crash. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
So, and I'm not trying to get us off topic. I'm just saying, like, so
No. It's well said.
when
It's well said.
when you say anachronistic, you mean this is a movie that's intentionally rendering the past as though it's through the lens of the present and not doing it incidentally because we live in the time we do.
Yeah, and it's if you watch it or have seen it before, it's pretty obvious, but I'll explain what maneuvers it does and why it does them.
Beautiful. And the argument is this is the best one.
Yeah,
I
so
love
the
it.
ones that I mean are like usually if you've seen theater, especially smaller theaters or high school theaters, you get anachronistic plays because it's easy to do.
Right.
Like, for example, like imagine Death of a Salesman, but like Willie Loman is like a V-blogger or something. Like that's an anachronistic theater,
Sure.
version of it.
Sure.
And my argument is they're never amazing. Like once you get over the hump of these themes are still true. You have the source work, so now it's just like kind of a bizarre play without like updated speech, or it's like outdated speech in a weirdly modern setting.
Right.
It's one or the others.
It's trying to please two masters and
Yeah.
ultimately doing neither one.
So
right.
if you know what I'm talking about, where it's just kind of trying to like really heavily update the tale, that leaves us only with a few anachronistic films that really have been made. And like, there's a bunch more I'm sure that I'm missing, but like, can you name anachronistic films that you actually enjoyed? A list that I have, like Romeo plus Juliet,
right?
Moulin Rouge, kind of,
right?
Marie Antoinette, definitely. Jesus Christ Superstar, definitely. Richard III.
And a lot of Shakespeare plays have been done anachronistically.
That's just because they're such well-known plays and well-taught plays.
Totally.
That, it's pretty easy for people to go like, oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
That from high school or whatever. They're all just winks to well-taught works that just skin it in usually musical or like a modern-day tragedy. Those are usually what we see. That's like the lion's share of it, right?
So totally. Would you include Shakespeare in Love?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think so. I think it's a little bit sliding into the Green Book territory because it's more about the thematic resonance of gender politics.
Yes.
And so it's more of like our point of view from the future, looking at an older time. But there are still like ways in which they talk. We see people kind of dealing with the same problems. But it's still in that heightened speech, and it's not like there's a dance number that is like, like a Bowie song or something like that.
Totally.
So.
I feel like Baz Luhrmann is sort of the one who does this most consistently.
Loves that shit.
I didn't see Great Gatsby. Was it an anachronistic film?
I also did not see Great Gatsby.
Okay.
Because I didn't see the point of it.
And I'm not a fan of the book. Hot take. I know.
Let us know. Maybe it's a good one. So obviously I haven't done all the research. Maybe Great Gatsby totally is ruinous to my Knight's Tale argument.
If you can't hear the scorn already in Abe's voice about this opinion you're going to render him,
a fuck. Because if you watch this movie and you don't like just go, oh, chef's kiss immediately, then you have no soul, and you just get right out of town. You take your stuff, you get in a car or something, and you go out of town.
And you haven't really seen A Knight's Tale if that's your reaction to Baz Luhrmann. That's your take.
What I'm saying. Yeah. So just a little framing. A Knight's Tale was directed by Brian Helgeland, and I just want you to get everyone to know that I don't mean this. I kind of do, but this isn't meant to sway your opinion, but it's his first time directing.
Yes.
He's a writer, he's a screenwriter, and the films that he wrote include L.A. Confidential, Mystic River.
Yeah, this list is crazy.
Man on Fire.
That's so many good movies for one writer. Like, I feel like people don't realize how rare it is to write that many good movies.
Yeah, they're solid movies that have kind of stayed with us. They aren't necessarily all Oscar nods or like...
Two of them are.
You know those films, more or less.
And they're also all
at least one of them.
They're all pretty intense, too. So it's interesting. They're all
pretty intense.
It's interesting
and this is a comedy.
Right. His directorial debut is this. Well, that's interesting.
All right, so if you haven't seen Knight's Tale, there's two big scenes that really do it, which is at the very beginning of the movie. There's an intro sequence, and it's shots of the crowd getting ready for a joust. There's a joust being held by like a local lord, and a bunch of knights are getting ready for the joust. And it's over the opening credits with everyone being supers and titles on screen, while Queen's "We Will Rock You" is played. And the important part is, it's twofold. One, that's weird because these are medieval peasants.
Right.
But two, the peasants actually start singing the song. They actually start hammering their fists, going bum bum ch, to that drum beat, and start singing as the crowd, all the peasants singing "We Will Rock You." It's very silly. Then later in the film, there's another big scene that kind of shows a nod like this, which is there's a ballroom dance where they dance over David Bowie's Golden Years with a kind of funky dance that's like an awkward version of, I guess, a 2000 dance. I wasn't going to a lot of dance clubs in 2000. It's not a dance that really ages well.
Yeah, it doesn't feel current. I will just put it that way.
But it is a thing. So here's the thing. I'm not avoiding or disagreeing with the amount of cringe both these sequences bring. But when I look at something like Romeo plus Juliet, or a modern version of like a Shakespeare play in the theater, I don't really gain much joy from it.
Yeah.
Like the combination doesn't bring me joy.
Right.
What I get is a sense of these story beats, these human wants, these needs are timeless, et cetera, et cetera. If the goal of the production is that these anachronistic retellings is to make me go, oh, yeah, that's still happening today in 2019. Oh, wow. Then great. But for the most part, it's not too much of a stretch for me to think about that with just the source material anyway. I can watch a normal Richard III and go like, yeah, that's true. People with power, that fucking happens.
Right.
It's happening today, you know? And so, like, I don't know what it's adding.
That's interesting you say that, because I would say that both the scenes that you mentioned are evidence of this film not being pretentious. Like, so
yes.
Baz Luhrmann, as a filmmaker who does anachronism, there's a pretentious quality to what he makes. And I know that sounds judgmental, but it is. Whereas I feel like Knight's Tale is definitely not embarrassed at all about having peasants chant "We Will Rock You" or a weird David Bowie dance. Like, just doesn't feel like we need to apologize for this or render it cool. It's not done in a cool way, you know?
Adam, that's very astute of you.
Right. You know?
Because I find that these grander, like, it's important to notice that, like, it's not about doing anachronism. It's about how you render these grander tales and fit them in with the mundane of the now. That is the sauce of my argument. It's about, like, how do you take the mundane of now as opposed to the mundane of the past and make the grander tales, because tales are always grand. They're always like an epic tragedy or something like that. How do you take that huge thing and make it feel like, oh, that's like me right now. I like the common connection of modern football and ancient gladiators. I'm not alluding to any specific artwork, but we've all had that moment where we go like, oh yeah, like football. Isn't football just like kind of like the ancient Roman gladiators? And we all know what that thought is. It's not a particularly complex thought. But the relevance of that thought is that one is just an updated version of another. I can see how crowds might clamor for the winners or hold flags or draw their heroes on paper like some kind of idolatry.
Yeah.
Or like kids, you know, going home and like making like baseball cards kind of stuff.
Right. Or the face painting and like all that stuff.
But it's not done with the kind of writing wink that it's like, remember, this is all a tale as old as time, right? That feels sterile and medicinal.
Right.
This is just a picture of people loving the fuck out of jousts. It's fun and it fits because jousts are not complex. Jousts are dumb and fun and football.
They are kind of dumb.
Keep your like arguments in fucking order. In other words, anachronism is kind of stupid, so you should use it stupidly. Right. So yes, medieval peasants thrusting their arms on wooden posts to the tune of "We Will Rock You" is silly and awkward, but it does succeed in transporting me to the thought, oh yeah, these guys were like the Marvel superhero canon once upon the time. It's fun, and if you push through the cringe, it's unabashedly fun.
Right.
And that's probably a taste thing, but it's a thing.
It's not a taste thing. I think you're absolutely right. Like, A Knight's Tale is different, because I just watched this again this morning. For like literally the first time in 18 years, so it's been a very long time. It's not trying to be Andy Warhol, right? Like, I feel like Andy Warhol is a good example of an artist who's
sure.
trying to use anachronism for the sake of commenting, right? Like, I'm commenting on this. That's what Baz Luhrmann's trying to do. And I don't think I think A Knight's Tale is like, what if we just like we're like, hey, the rules don't matter as long as you understand emotionally how these people feel, and we're willing to like sacrifice some of the ancient history of it for that purpose, right? I mean, that's my fundamental takeaway from the movie. Anyway,
I think it's to try to keep the theme alive, to keep the point of the story alive, and to retell it in a way that is like a modern person can ingest it.
Agreed.
That is, to me, the point of that's as far as anachronism can really go.
And
a lot of that is comedy. A lot of that is just fun and stupid jokes. And that's why anachronism is always played better for me in comedy.
Yeah.
That's why like Monty Python and things like the Holy Grail.
Right.
Hugely anachronistic. The very ending of Holy Grail is not only anachronistic, it's like meta-narrative. And it also is essentially just trying to have fun with it. It's not trying to say something larger.
Sure.
That like Jesus was bad or something like that. It's just trying to say, it's not trying to do something crazy lofty with its thematic approach. It's just trying to do it. So that's the opening step of my argument, because there's two parts of my statement. One is that like A Knight's Tale is thoroughly anachronistic, and here's my framing of why I think it's a good type of anachronism. But now I have to convince you of why the movie is actually a good movie.
Sure.
Which is kind of more part and parcel of this podcast.
Do you think that people think of Knight's Tale as a good movie?
I don't think they might enjoy the movie, and that's the whole point.
Right.
But I think that sometimes we don't see the stitching of like a really well embroidered like tapestry.
Right.
Because like the theme of the movie is to like, can a man change his stars? That's a line that's said time and time again.
And it's really, that's a really cool way to talk about it too.
It's a real easy, typical hero's myth. It's a special boy.
Yeah.
He's not too special. He's not going to kill dragons or anything.
He's not magic.
He just is going to be kind of the symbol of the lower class, kind of uprooting like taking the wind out of the sails of the higher class. And they're doing it through this feudal system, which is knights and lords versus peasants. And they do it all the time. I'm going to start with the music, though, because the first two examples I gave were musical aspects.
Yes, you did.
And I think that there's something interesting about both the choices that they did there. So obviously those two tracks, which I want to get back to a little bit later. But there's also there's a Boys Are Back in Town by Thin Lizzy at the Parade of Knights entering London for the final battle.
I really liked that moment. I honestly think that was really good, like a really good anachronism.
The boys are back in town.
I think I just like that song anyway, but also
it's a meme song. It's hilarious.
It is, but honestly, it felt a little like I feel like it did enrich the feeling of that moment. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, exactly. Because they all just had a scene talking about when the last time they came to London was.
It was,
and a lot of them are like 6 months, 2 years, and then like Heath Ledger, William says. 12 years. I haven't been back like my entire life, and everyone goes, "Oh shit!"
Right.
And so it's this kind of bittersweet, unique thing for all of them. Like one of them, it's a homecoming. Another, it's like a reckoning. You know, it's like there's a lot of mixed messages in there, but then they still bring it back to the comedy, and just it's like, oh, this is silly. So that's another one I just want to mention. The last one being the first montage. Or the second montage of the film, but the first montage where William is learning to joust is to lowrider, which is also great because, like, I don't know,
because you like
it. Take the lyrics of, if you take the lyrics of that track, it's kind of about that, you know,
sure.
It's true that he is both low at that time. And he's a writer.
Wow.
But that's
all right.
But that's not the point of it.
Just briefly. So would you say the director is using these songs because it's more precise as a tone setter? You know what I mean? Like
I think
those songs are more precise than like say
and
score.
I think it's to remind us that like things like Game of Thrones are silly, even though Game of Thrones hadn't been out for almost a decade.
Although Robert Baratheon is in this movie.
Although Mark Addy is in this.
Yes.
So there you go.
I was like, oh my god, it was really great. Also, the
Alan
gal,
Tudyk?
and the gal from Breaking Bad, who's Lydia from Breaking Bad is in this movie.
Is that Shannon Sassoon?
No, she's the.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. It's been a while since I've seen Breaking Bad. Yeah. Okay,
I was like, oh yeah, Lydia.
There's a lot of hidden powers.
Totally.
There's a lot of really good people in this. Paul Bettany's in it as Chaucer, which we're gonna get to.
He's so good. And I'm sorry, what's the name of the redheaded guy again? His name just blanked.
Alan Tudyk.
He is. His face is a national treasure. That man is a precious thing.
He is on fire every single time.
He is crushing it in this movie so hard.
You know that he's in. You know who he is in Wreck-It Ralph, don't you?
I've seen Wreck-It Ralph. No, who is he?
He's the king of candy.
I love that guy. I just like only movies could be a proper format for what he's great at. You know, he's just so good at it. Briefly, I would just want to revisit the music one more time, if you don't mind. So, like, Oh, you had more to say. Okay, so just briefly.
Well, I want to say all of those. The reason I kind of went through each of them, is because I just want to. I started reading articles like about the musical approach of the sound designers and the composers of the movie.
Okay.
And this one has another big one. The name of the composer and musical, or I believe he might be musical supervisor in this, is Carter Burwell, which might be, if you listen to the Coen Brothers podcast that we do, familiar name, because between him and T-Bone Burnett, they both have done all the Coen Brothers music.
Okay. I was
Carter
not aware of that.
Burwell is also worked with a lot of different. I think he's worked with Sam Mendes and stuff like that. He might actually have an Academy Award.
Okay.
And I want to read a little passage that he writes about specifically the David Bowie track during the dance.
Yeah, that's the one that I find intriguing. Keep going.
Yeah. And so he said something about it in an interview, which is, quote, "It presented several challenges. First, the whole dance had been choreographed and filmed to an arbitrary tempo, which begins at a slow, courtly pace and speeds up and up until Bowie's song kicks in. I had to match that tempo and the choreography after the fact, and also find some credible path from a formal and restrained dance to a joyful 70s pop tune. We got Bowie's permission to pull tracks from his multi-track master so I could mix these into my arrangement, helping me to introduce his song before it really began. The end result is on either of the CDs in which they were released, but an excerpt."
Oh,
In
that's
other words,
interesting.
he's literally mixing modern music with old rhythm patterns
Right.
in order to make it seem like both. Do not think for a second, just like I was talking about with the Wedding Singer episode of this podcast, do not think for a second that these people are not fucking going to work when they think about, like, what is the thematic resonance of this movie? What's the point of this movie? Well, we're trying to update something here.
Yeah.
And so he's like, okay, so how do I approach that? And his question is, well, they just shot a courtly dance, and I know I want to go to Bowie. Bowie's very fast. He has faster BPMs on a lot of his tracks, especially this track in particular. So how am I going to get them to do, like, how am I going to get from one place to another? Well, he's going to approach it and find all the things in his toolkit in order to, like, basically synthesize. And there's a moment, if you watch it, where you can hear, this is just sounds that kind of vaguely come from Golden Years. And then it's full on Golden Years, but you can actually hear, like, the 8 seconds that Carter Burwell's at his best, where he's actually making the transition. And meanwhile, on screen, what we see is the dance is literally taking that transition as well.
Right.
It's very well done.
It is well done. That's accurate. What did you think about rendering the dance? Like, what do you think about choosing to do that particular dance anachronistically? Is it like, you think it's obligatory because of the conceit of the movie? Or like,
I think it's tongue-in-cheek about the conceit of the movie because
I
I
see.
think it's about trying to throw a rebellious kind of argument into, quote-unquote, the Golden Years.
Right.
And the idea of what the past was. So I think it's actually supposed to be irreverent and saying, like, you know, like how they used to dance in their, like, it's what William is doing literally in the movie, which
Right.
is everyone's laughing at him because he doesn't know how to dance. And they're like, give us a dance of Gelderland. Give us a dance of your people. And he's like, well, he's like, okay, they're foreign people, so I could probably get away with a lot. But he, like, does a few moves that he learned that are kind of like, and then starts making shit up.
right.
And when he starts making shit up, in their court, that's nonsense because it's like making up a sentence that doesn't have any words. It's like, I've never seen that before. That's stupid. And what he's doing is he's just kind of doing his own thing because he knows that they'll probably just listen eventually. And then it takes someone who has kind of the authority in the court, Shannon Sessman's character, Jocelyn, to kind of step in and go, you're like, yeah, I can see how this
And
is a dance.
legitimize him, right? She has to legitimize
Yeah.
him to some degree.
So I think that the song is ultimately trying to say, like, the Golden Years are kind of bullshit, or at least they're like more of a dream. They're more of a wonderful dream about how something can be and a style. But ultimately, like, we shouldn't stick to it,
Right. It can die like everything else can die.
which is, I believe, what the song's about. Feel free to correct me.
No. I don't disagree. I'm actually kind of forming a theory of my own right now because of what you're saying. That's really it corresponds with yours. Just last, I know you want to move on from the music.
Yeah.
Do you think it's weird that they didn't have everybody sing "We Are the Champions" at the end? I thought that was a strange choice not to have everybody sing that at the end. Because
Yeah,
they do have the song.
I don't know.
They have a weird cover of the song under credits, but it's like such an interesting dovetail. And it's like the actual narrative journey of this guy. Why didn't they do that? Right? It's so obvious.
Yeah, I think it's probably usually when something's so obvious like that, my guess is that they probably wanted to.
And they couldn't?
But
you think they didn't get the rights or something? They couldn't.
Because it's not like it didn't occur to them.
Yeah.
That they're like, we could get the Queen song.
Right. Well, and like
just
the bookends of it and the whole, it's like, why didn't they do that? It's so obvious. And it would have been awesome because that song is one of the greatest songs in rock history.
Right.
Okay. Well, yeah, I guess we will never know or never Google.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that stuff is really hard to find online. If people can find that online. A brief word on the costumes. I think the costumes is doing the same exact thing that the music is doing.
Even more so.
Yeah, which is another case of when a movie or the craftsmanship behind a movie is like the idea and the vision of the film is being disseminated to the people who are just working on like sewing stuff.
Yeah.
You know, that they know what they're doing. So examples of that is that the costumes are very outdated, especially Shannon Sessomon's character, her entire ensemble. I think it's a really good fit because she comes from she was a fashion model.
Right.
So putting her in like Gaga-esque loud wardrobes is like a direct comment to the timelessness of fashion in this specific way. Not only, it's not just that fashion... Not that all fashion works or this fashion works. It's not thumbs up, thumbs down. It's more that even back in the day, the celebrities and the lords and ladies of the time would be expected to wear new clothes every single outing or to dress to match with their dance partners. And we're still doing it today. So that's kind of a simple thing.
Sure.
It's just a nice fit. Another thing that happened is like the upside down Nike symbol that Kate serves as a mark. When I first watched that, I remember sitting in a room, it was like in college, and I remember someone going like, that is so stupid. That's just a Nike symbol. And I remember going like, yeah, that's the point. They're sports. This is a sports movie.
Right. That's exactly
She's
what
literally,
it is.
It's a joke literally saying, let's create Nike.
Right.
She is the first Nike. So I refuse to believe this is a mistake.
And then you hit him with your own joust that you were just holding on to right in the eyes.
Yeah. Exactly. So like ultimately when it comes out, and it's like, with the costumes is like costumes and the music, and like you mentioned with like Shakespeare in Love, the speech slips out as Elizabethan more often than not, but at times becomes updated. It's only a few times, and it's mostly done to take the wind out of the sails of the higher, more lofty speeches in the movies.
Yes,
like the heightened speech, the gravitas.
Yes,
but usually it's said by characters of lower repute. And then I think this is ultimately just as the filmmakers are just wanting us to side with the everymen and women, i.e. the peasant's view of the system.
That's exactly, to me, that's like really the point of the anachronism in general, is that like,
yes,
it fits
the theme.
Yeah, every time that we're coming from the point of view of somebody who's of lower class, we give them a modern sort of way of rendering that, whether it's clothes or music or whatever, so that we relate to their side and not to the side of the royals. Yeah, this year's best.
But they're doing it well.
This year's best movie is arguably Parasite, which is exactly that message. And it's exactly. I think that it also never goes out of style. Like that's a timeless message in its own right. Anyway,
I see what you're saying. So you're like A Knight's Tale, Parasite. They're both good.
Yes, you got me right. Yeah, just put it on my tombstone. You quoted me correctly.
I want to kind of get through this quicker because it's less on point, but this is just me like watching the film and going like as a director and just like editor and stuff, and I go like, that's fucking good. But this is something that just gives another like notch in the belt, so to speak, of like, oh, this is a good movie, is that there's an indifference to the typical rules of Act 1 and Act 3 in this movie. Depending on how you strictly define Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, which has been time and time again by like Sid Field's screenplay. The guy who wrote Blank Check, Blake Snyder, has Save the Cat. There's a lot of these books that kind of say like on page 30 this happens. Right. But there's more or less a basic consensus over what these Act 1s, 2s, and 3s are. Now, something since high school, a lot of people who have taken some English classes are confused by is that you have Act 1 and 2, and that's one story, right? And it has this like bell curve, and like people can map out tragedy and comedy and draw a line in a graph, and people have seen those YouTube videos. How does that rectify with like an Act 5 system? Shakespeare wrote in 5 acts, right? How come he's doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Well, how's that different from 3? Well, there's many different answers, but I'm going to go into things can be broken into both Act 1, 2, and 3 and 5 acts, and why that's a perfect marriage in this movie of a type of morality play. In other words, it's trying to tell a tale more specifically of its time, which would be done in the 5-act structure with a 3-act movie, which is now.
So it's revising a structure that would fit its time. Anachronistically,
yeah,
is your
baby.
point. What a
it's a Knight's Tale,
what
baby.
You hero. What a point. I'm really
so
excited.
This is less about directing, but it's more about writing and structure. So the first, and I just want to kind of, because I can do it with the whole movie, but that will be boring. I want to talk about efficiency in the first 5 minutes of A Knight's Tale.
Yeah.
You know that William Thatcher, who's like a meager squire of Sir Ector, is great at sword fighting, but he's too low class to train in a joust. He finds his lord dead, puts on his armor and becomes him, and they win some tournament winnings. Roland and Watt, whose goal, they're the two pals, is to collect winnings to get back home just to eat a decent meal. Because they're just like, well, we have no job anymore because our guy's dead. And then they meet Chaucer, the writer, and in this tale, a compulsive gambler, is seen at first naked, becomes the group's promoter and PR rep.
hype man.
So they're all rags to riches stories. This is done in 19 minutes total. But it's really all of the work that's done is really done in like 5. Because
it's really like 2/3 of the actual narrative of this movie too.
Right.
Like
the reason why when you go, but it says 19 minutes, that's true. But remember, you have 2 minutes for, oh no, there's a dead, our dude's dead. And putting on the armor. 2.5 for an anachronistic "We Will Rock You" intro that doesn't forward the story at all, just kind of gives you a tone about it. 3 minutes for the joust itself, which once again, that can just be like skipped ahead. Like I'm just trying to think like a screenwriter about like what moves the picture forward. And really what that does is it's just like you're enjoying the joust, getting familiar with jousting. It's all valuable. It should be in there. But ultimately all it does for the story is just say like, here's what jousts are. They won the joust. And then the last is 3.5 minutes where the gang gets paid, determines that they can do this as a job, i.e. fool the lords and ladies and steal their money because they're good at tournaments. And then it ends with a 2.5 minute montage where William trains to become Sir Ector in the joust.
It's a lowrider.
And 4 more minutes of scene work where we're introduced into Chaucer.
Right.
The first 4 to 6 of the gang has been assembled. Everyone has said what their wants are.
Yeah.
And we have gotten the conceit of the movie, that they're going to heist lords and ladies. That is your Act 1 complete.
And it's interesting.
That's
it's
it.
interesting.
19 minutes.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's interesting that they didn't start the movie with the scene where William is sort of given over to the Lord as a child, because we do get that scene later, and it
does a flashback,
and it is sort of his character impetus. But I bet the filmmaker and writer feels like, I don't want anything serious in the first tone here. Like I want it to be fun for like 2/3 of this movie before we get any real serious stuff. Right? Because that's an interesting choice. Wouldn't you? If it was a dramatic movie, that's definitely the first scene of the movie, right?
Yep. And it's also a trick that in between like there's usually an Act 3 or an Act 4, or depending on like in I'm trying to think of Twelfth Night. 12th Night is a perfect example of a 5-act structure that has flashbacks or at least reveals of information that they kind of retcon or introduce later for the purpose. It's an old bag of tricks.
Yeah.
It's just the flashback idea. But it's one that just peppers into the character of the story where you go, oh, I see how we all got here. You know, even though that information is already on the table, you can just take for granted he's just here. He turned into a squire somehow. We get the reason why he was a squire for the purpose of no purpose other than character development. Usually because Act 4 and 5 usually there's a reveal of some kind. They do that in this film too.
Right.
So
yeah, and that is sort of like more thespian, right? Like to have these like. Or like sort of more of an ancient screenwriting way of doing things. And I guess screenwriting, I'm putting that in like more like playwriting. To have those reveals later.
Sure. Yeah. Because you can do things on screen that you can't do in play. That is true. Ultimately, I think this is as an Act 1. It's a big fuck you to the story structure. It doesn't really meld Like if this was and the reason why I say that is if this was a typical Act 1 where it's just trying to show a hero kind of rags to riches story, and is also kind of a romantic comedy, you're gonna also meet, before Act 1 is complete, the romance and adventure arc. The romance arc is already up top too. They're usually done simultaneously.
Right. Usually in Act 1 for sure. Right.
Yeah, so it gets right to adventure, and then it's like interrupted by the romance, and then you have these 2 through lines because she comes in later. In other words, it reminds me of Princess Bride.
Oh, I love it.
Which is the reverse, because the Princess Bride just shows you a romance with no adventure, and then by happenstance, adventure starts occurring.
Interesting.
Do you see what I'm saying?
do.
So it's like it's not trying to mingle things together. It's trying to usurp one thread takes over, and then another thread takes over, and then another thread takes over. It's kind of braiding the story as opposed to simultaneously running them in parallel.
It definitely
and then they sometimes meet.
It definitely doesn't feel like the movie doesn't feel like it's on the clock ever. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't use time and like needing to run things parallel as a way of advancing time. It doesn't really do that much. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like how long would you say this movie takes place over?
How long?
Like what period of time would you say?
Well,
from
yeah,
start to finish.
5 months.
Maybe, right? Like
We have the whole time where he's just winning a bunch,
Right.
and the villain
right.
is essentially like going off to war. Maybe more than that.
And what's interesting
But,
about
yeah.
that is typically when you're introducing things like paralleling, it's usually because you're sort of like using time as like the thing that pushes the story forward. But this one kind of doesn't care about
not.
that.
No, it doesn't.
You know, again, which I also think that kind of suggests a bit of anachronism, right? That it's not concerned with like, and then next May this is going to happen, and then in the spring there's this tournament. Like none of that happens in this movie.
Mm-hmm. There's a small scene before the Paris tournament.
I love it.
Where it's like an establishing shot, like, oh, welcome to Paris kind of thing. And it's a long shot of the Paris in the background. But in the foreground, there's a priest giving a sermon about Peter abandoning Jesus.
Yes.
And he says, once,
I noticed that.
thrice, twice, thrice, you'll deny me. A little bit later in Paris, William, not once, not twice, but 3 times, denies the words and wisdom of his friends to let himself be just it's all just fucking run is what they tell him. And he's like, no, I can't, I'm a knight doesn't run. And so he gets put in jail.
Yeah.
So it's
at
like
the tournament.
I just thought it was like one of those things that like good movies do, is that like a short throwaway transition scene has a thematic resonance to it's not the most perfect, but it's just something that like, okay, the writers are thinking about like, what can we do with this space?
Well, it's interesting. There is a kind of rhythmic parallelism between those scenes. Because when I watched it, I did notice that scene. I was like, why do they feel like we needed to hear this 30 seconds of recounting that Bible story? And your theory is that it's set up to contrast Peter's betrayal with William's not betrayal of his ideals.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Interesting.
It's the conversation between it's where the morality play kind of is setting in and telling us you hate the game, but you kind of have to play the game.
Sure.
And their version of playing the game is to run, because they know that they don't have the
live
power.
to fight another day.
And he refuses to do it. He's going to play their game and die by their game because he believes so wholeheartedly in the idea, not of justice, but of like being honest, that he will not lie, he will not back down. And that is a folly of his.
Yeah, he's sort of
of course, he then learns by just having, as he's been in the stocks, which is always where this was leading. We get the king, the prince, soon to be king, kind of steps in and goes, you're a knight now.
Yeah.
And he just Deus Ex Machina is that. And that's kind of cool. But ultimately Like it's just another way in which he learns. Or in moral plays, you just have someone do something emphatically like "I will not learn," and then they learn by the end of it, and that's just what's happening.
Interesting.
Here. Now, I think the Jesus and Peter abandonment thing, we kind of learn by contextual reads, and it's been a while since I read the Bible, but I don't know when Peter exactly learns his lesson about that.
It's after Jesus is crucified.
Exactly. Yeah, well,
that's
so
the night Jesus was arrested, and Peter's like,
pretty typical.
"I'll never deny you," and Jesus is like, "Yes, you will tonight," and then of course it happens, right?
I love a few plants and payoffs that the movie does. Paul Bettany has a thing where he comes out and he says like a speech in like kind of a wrestling-esque hype man.
He's so good.
And to the point that he gets all the peasants. He's like, lords, ladies, and everyone else, like he's immediately talking to the peasants, which is not something you typically do. By the end of the film, other announcers are like stealing his bit.
Right. I like that
and
too.
they're trying to bring everyone down as equal because he's like a game changer. Also, that's great because that was kind of Chaucer's bag, is to kind of like poke the fun out of the high class, elevate the low class kind of deals.
Yeah. He did even everyone out as a writer. That's what he's probably best known for.
There's plant and payoffs of the lines, you have been weighed, you have been measured, and you've been found wanting, as well as you will look at me from the flat of your back. These are just typical like screenwriter tricks. They're nothing crazy interesting. It's just like, oh, it's nice because you like turn it around on them. Yeah. So there's a lot more I could unpack about this movie, but I see the
You feel the Ides of March.
I feel the eyes of. I feel like the eyes of time.
So,
there's a lot of things that aren't the greatest in this movie. The gender discrimination, which are pointing out at like back then it was backward and barbaric. So that's nice, I guess. It's not your typical "I am no man" kind of Lord of the Rings apostrophe. It's kind of woven into both main female character arcs. They constantly are combating the status quo and ultimately get what they want due to their like diligence, seeing their oppressors at their heels kind of deal. So it's like it is a little bit more woven into the fabric of the story. That said, it's not a very forward film.
No,
and I'm pretty sure it doesn't even pass the Bechdel test.
It does not. I was looking for that.
It's kind of not bad for 2001, but not good.
It's,
I mean?
It was.
It's in part and parcel of 2001 films, but doesn't go out of its way to be a piece of shit. Especially because it's like a minefield of these types of movies because you're portraying typical traditional Middle Ages gender roles kind of thing.
I think you could say pretty reasonably that Jocelyn is the most anachronistic character in that movie, but I don't think it's because she's woke. I think it's because they didn't, other than being a foil / love interest for William, she doesn't have a lot of purpose, like her agency. Like for instance, like why is she at all these tournaments at all? You know what I mean? Like
right.
Who is she?
It's like a paradox
right.
kind of thing. Like you're trying to be woke, but you're not. You're still weird in the system. For example, there's one really bad version of this. The most damning line in the thing is Jocelyn literally walks in William's tent at one point. She asked him to do something and he did it. So she says, "Your prize," referring to herself.
Right.
So 2001 is just like most things in 2001. It's pretty much shitty. It's a little bit ahead of it because it's that bit with the "your prize" bit is immediately undercut in that like Hollywood tete-a-tete way where it's like undermined. But still.
I mean, he has lines. William has the line when he's next to the villain where he's defending Jocelyn as a human being and the villain thinks of her as like essentially a trophy.
He's going to put her on his mantle.
I think just to make that counterpoint as clear as it could be. It's not horrible, this movie. It's
not horrible because his response is she's not the target, she's the arrow.
Right.
Which you go like, oh, cute, but then you also go like, I don't know what that means.
Like, okay, so you reversed some words, but you didn't mean anything by them? I don't know.
Exactly. That's what I think I'm getting at too, is it's 2000 woke in that it wants really bad.
Right.
to like, fucking destroy the patriarchy, but it doesn't understand why or how.
I mean, I think it just like a lot of pop culture. It's trying to say the values of its time to appeal to the people who are going to watch it. It's not really a think piece, right? Like, I wouldn't call this a think piece. It's not a high art statement about the nature of gender equality or anything. You know, it just is like, we're not going to reinforce the medieval knights archetypes. We have to comment on them, so we're going to do that.
Right.
Right? I mean...
A final note on the structure, just because I talked about it with Act 1, doing the same thing with Act 4 and 5, and Act 4 and 5 of the 5-act structure. In other words, like kind of more or less Act 3 in modern telling of how stories are made with the 3-act structure. Because most adventure films, usually they rise up in Act 3, usually the Act 3 beginning with their struggle to
right. All is lost.
His rise up doesn't happen until the last 8 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
That's about 5 to 10 minutes later than most films.
I would say that this movie is not really trying to do the typical structure for the vast majority of it because it just wants the fun. Like, this movie is very committed to, like, hey, this is fun, and then, like, at the end he becomes an actual knight, because sure, and, you know, and that's it. You know, like it's not trying to... Yeah, it doesn't... It unabashedly is like, this is going to be fun. We want it to stay as fun as it can be. We're not going to encumber it with plot it doesn't need, so it doesn't. You know,
and there's many ways to skin 3X. There's many ways to skin 5X even. But if you're looking at a fairly traditional morality play with a hero involved, like a 5X structure, you're going to look at 5X being like, 1, the choice, 2, the initial victory, 3, the hope of like an impossible future, like we can keep this going and this is going to be perfect, 4, the fall, 5, the rise. So when I say like his rise comes at the last 8 minutes, 10 minutes of the film.
The rebirth.
What I really mean to say is that it's once again doing this 5-act thing.
Oh, I see.
It's kind of framing the classic
homage
morality
to
play.
its old classic structure.
Exactly.
That's interesting.
It's still skinnable to 3 acts because it's got a lot more going than most things. But if you ever go and watch watch a morality play or even Shakespeare plays, for the most part, once it happens, it's fucking over. They're done. And then he killed him.
Yeah.
An end of it. Usually a guy walks out and says, and that's what happened, guys. Fucking did it. And here we go.
There's
go home.
the story.
It's over.
I hope you liked it.
You know, it's like,
farewell.
It's fucking quick.
Yeah.
It's like they do that shit because that's the point. It's all waiting for the rise. And then they play it out and it happens. And then he wins. And there's no prolonging or gilding the lily where it is... And then they became queens and kings.
Right. It doesn't at all
it's just
address that.
He won the fucking tournament. And everyone was like, yeah, you did it, buddy.
Right. It doesn't deal with so wait, does he get titles and lands because he's a knight now? Is that a job now for him?
Of course, but it doesn't matter. It's about the jousting.
Yeah, do they ever...
It's just a stupid
Does him
movie.
and Jocelyn ever get married? What happens there?
Yeah.
None of that gets answered at all.
There's 2 quotes I really think, also going back to the writing, that I think are very good, very, very good. Just in terms of, I want you to think about things that might be said in A Princess Bride or something like that. One is Chaucer's talking about his 2, I forget what the Chaucer book, but it's Canterbury Tales. And it's, there's 2... there's 2 figures who are trying to get money from him throughout the film, and they're very clearly analogs to 2 of the tales in Canterbury Tales.
Yes, obviously.
I forget what they are. It's the Tinker or some shit.
I want to say the Miller's Tale, right? The Miller's and the
Miller's Tale, yeah. And he talks about, because they're depicted one's got pimples, one's got weird, one's very fat, one's greasy. You know, it's because Chaucer, and it's well known if you're taught in those classes, there's clearly a well-known figure at the time that he was just lampooning in that. And so there's a line that Paul Bettany as Chaucer says, which is, I will eviscerate you in fiction. Every pimple, every last character flaw. I was naked for a day. You will be naked for eternity. I just think that is a slam dunk of a fuck you.
It is. Paul Bettany
it's pretty good.
Crushes in this movie.
It's pretty good.
He just crushes.
And also, going back to the Canterbury Tales thing, the fact that they picked up on that and put it in the movie, that's pretty good. That's pretty good writing.
So So can I give you some film school feedback?
Yeah.
Are you ready for that?
Yeah.
I was with you for most of this. No, I'm just kidding. Every time I'm going to use a film school ism.
Yeah. I love what you did about this.
I was really following
Here's
with
some
you. I was with
criticism.
you. Now,
because I can't take it. I can't take anyone to like. If I'm gonna be, if I'm a filmmaker, I have this like the thinnest skin.
yes,
Of
as
all
we
time.
all do.
That is something you learn in film school. You have to.
You must have
say
grape
that with your
thin skin
comments.
if you're going to go to film school.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, love this. I just want to go back to the main assertion here, which is that this is your favorite, I think is fair to say, your favorite anachronistic movie. And because I think we've talked about why this is better than a Baz Luhrmann film. But what I'm curious about is, like, what do you think about it in comparison to Princess Bride, which is also anachronistic, and Shakespeare in Love? Would you agree that those count? And how would you distinguish it?
Yeah. If your criticisms of A Knight's Tale aren't specific to the like, it's really cringeworthy when they do the "We Will Rock You" bits, and there's no analog to that in Shakespeare in Love and Princess Bride, because there isn't. This is a lot more shameless of a movie. It doesn't give a fuck about what shame is.
It doesn't feel...
but ultimately, in the way I think you mean, yes, they are all anachronistic.
Yeah. Like, so Knight's Tale is probably a response to Shakespeare in Love, right? It doesn't have to be, but it probably is, because Shakespeare in Love was made in, like, what, 98? So
98
or
or
99,
99,
just to
yeah.
like bring out the parallels for everybody, Shakespeare in Love has Bill Shakespeare in it, and it's the story of William Shakespeare falling in love with an actual person, and then that's the inspiration for Romeo and Juliet. And I think it's fair to say, sort of a wacky version of Shakespeare, who's sort of a writer for money who gets inspired, and then like they achieve more than they expected, et cetera, right? So. Mm-hmm. In response, we have this Knight's Tale movie, which is talking about sort of the idealism in knighthood, like in ancient antiquities knighthood, right? And uses sort of the joust tournament and the sports movie metaphors, and then it renders Chaucer, right? And it seems very much like it's a response to Shakespeare because the ideas, like the premises, are so obviously responsive. What do you think? Would you agree with that?
No, I think that's fair.
So
yeah, I think so.
The first challenge I have here is that I'm not sure everybody really knows what Chaucer wrote. Do you?
He's not as popular even in historical,
for sure,
relevance.
Right? And because of that, so we have Chaucer is no longer playing anything like the historical figure that he was. Instead, he's sort of grafted onto this tale to kind of put it in what you might call sort of a parable category. Like, I would say this movie is more like a parable in the way that Chaucer's Canterbury Tales are kind of parables.
Are all parables.
Than it is a narrative, like an alt history narrative, the way that...
Why else would it be called A Knight's Tale?
And I think that's why Chaucer has to be in the movie. Right? Because Chaucer...
That's how he named his
chapters. And also because Chaucer was writing sort of a series of stories that are embodying various ideals and morals of the time, right? Like, and that's really the point of Canterbury Tales. And so this one is a slightly more simplistic narrative, I think, to fit into those categories. Whereas Shakespeare in Love, it is anachronistic, but it's also a little bit more pretentious. How do you feel about it when you compare those two works? Do you feel like Knight's Tale is at all inferior? Because I think that's what people would say. What do you think about that?
I think people would say that, and I think it's because most of the scenes are elevated by a serious look into it. I think that there's a grittiness that comes along with like a lot of dramas,
right?
Because they want you to feel the drama in a way you should feel. Like, there aren't any moments where you have to deal with like death in a crazy way in this movie or something.
There's
like
no
that.
real hurt
or like,
here in this movie.
There's no stakes because things can be laughed at, you know? Therefore, and I think that is I personally find that kind of silly.
Right.
I think that I think audiences are intelligent enough to kind of do shifts of gear in that way. I think a movie can be really funny in one moment and then make you cry in the
100%.
next. I don't think that Knight's Tale is that movie necessarily for everybody.
I would say, so just to...
I think it can tear people up. I think there's moments of resonance.
Just to give you a little bit more credence to your theory, like the father's story, I found quite moving in this movie. Like I was surprised because I thought it was for the most part this is popcorn, but that was actually a very resonant story.
When he like tells his son or when he tells his father, he's like, I'm your son. That's what's going on right now. And he goes like, oh,
did you follow your feet
so
back
happy.
home, William? It's really
God.
good.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of heartstrings being pulled.
Yeah.
I think that Shakespeare in Love is trying to make more of a I'd have to rewatch that really to dissect it under this lens, but I do feel that what that movie mostly is doing is, aside from the anachronism, it's really trying to take hold. It's not his story as much as it's Gwyneth Paltrow's story.
See, and
Thomas,
that's
whatever.
Absolutely true. I mean, I think Gwyneth Paltrow's character is the most interesting in that movie. See, I think that these two movies are anachronistic for different purposes. So, like, Shakespeare in Love, I think, is anachronistic so that you don't take it too seriously. And by that, I mean, like, so that you don't think this is attempting to be a biopic about how Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet. Like, I think the anachronism distances it enough from that people are like, oh, that's a fun idea. Whereas I think A Knight's Tale actually has a kind of populist social moral reason to use anachronism, and that puts it again in the Chaucer camp. And so, like, there's actually kind of a higher reason for a lot of the decisions that are made here. So I guess that's actually credence to your theory that, like, if you look down and, like, why is it made this way? Like, why did they decide to do anachronism? There's actually some really complicated, intelligent reasons behind it that you would never think if you were just watching this ridiculous movie, right?
Yeah.
And I like that about it.
I think it's sticking to... I think the most important of it, or the simplest version I could find of navigating in that space, was just to say that it's not trying to make an elevated claim because of its silliness would get in the way of that.
Right.
And it knew what it was going to be, and it stuck to what it's good at. So stuff like Nike swooshes on armor makes sense because you go like, I see what you're doing. But it doesn't do much more than that. It doesn't make me go, oh God, the Nikes and the Nikes,
right.
And it's like, because of that, anachronism is always doomed to fail in that way. Or I've never seen a movie that like speeds it up and goes like, oh, in Richard III, even though it's more modern day when it was made, like it isn't. Yeah, it's totally not weird that they're talking Shakespearean. It's totally not weird.
Right.
Like, no,
exactly.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
Exactly. I mean, and for that, I mean, also one of your favorite things ever, Deadwood, is a kind of anachronism because it's almost like a Shakespearean version of the Old West.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's interesting. So, like, I just, like, I find the idea of, like, why would you do a movie this way? Like, I find that endlessly fascinating, of course, as do you, because we're filmmakers. But... Mm-hmm. I'm still like trying to wrap my head around whether I can like call it best. Like, why is this movie better?
Yeah, best is qualitative.
Sure,
like, in the end, this movie isn't This isn't a movie for everyone. Right. Skeptics and film buffs who haven't seen the film, though, I'd say watch this movie with as much childlike eyes as you can. The reason that we all got into movies, and just let the simplistic fable take you in, and tell me you had more fun in this. Or tell me you haven't had more fun in this than watching the last several adventure romps of the last decade.
It is.
Because in the end, it's all about joy. And
it's also, it's not cynical the way that, like, so we do see anachronistic movies now, right? But they're things like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter or like Pride and Prejudice plus Zombies.
Frankenstein.
Right. Those are anachronistic movies, but they're cynical. Right, they're like, okay, so we're gonna like take like they don't care about the source material,
I think they're trying to be
Yes,
cool,
they're trying to be
man. I mean,
cool.
cynicism
Exactly.
is a part of that because I think what you mean is that it's playing it straight.
Well,
Like,
what's funny is like looking at all these movies, with the exception of Princess Bride, I'm having a hard time coming up with another movie that did anachronistic time period stuff that was trying to use it in a heartfelt way and wasn't doing it either for jokes or for cool factor or for cred. You know,
Yeah.
like that. This is kind of the only movie like that, because like even like 10,000 BC, right, is that caveman movie that's anachronistic. But I think but nobody's taking that as in any way a commentary on the narrative structure or on the nature of chivalry or any of that stuff, right?
Maybe I'll update the title because the more you convince me that Princess Bride it's not equally anachronistic as this movie, but it is got a hefty portion of it, and very few movies shine a light to Princess Bride.
Of course.
I'm not going to put this in the Princess Bride category, but I will say that it's much closer to the Princess Bride category than you think.
But also Princess Bride
most people
has
think.
the quality of being a story within a story. So it's not just an anachronism, it's like a rendering of a fairy tale as being told, right? Like, isn't there a kid who's being read to? Yeah. So, like, that conceit...
Isn't there a kid? Have you seen
I have. It's just been like 20 years.
You mean Fred
Savage
that's right.
And
it's Peter Falk?
I totally forgot that.
You mean...
Yeah. I know. I'm a monster. I'm sorry. I'm a monster.
It's fine.
So,
it's fine.
But
it's
I
great.
think that conceit...
I love it.
I think the human conceit of this movie. No, I think the conceit of having it being read to a kid sort of eliminates the boldness of it being anachronistic because it's intended to be sort of rewritten and palatable for a child. Right?
Yeah,
it's not like this is how
a self-awareness of it.
It also doesn't take place in like some version of Earth's history. You know, like it's a fairy tale that takes place in no time, essentially. Like you can't call Never-Ending Story anachronistic.
In my times.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
When I was a kid. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. I think the self-awareness level of Princess Bride sends that to the top because it plays these wonderful, joyful little things of they like interrupt the story. At one point there's a bit in Princess Bride where he goes like, is this story just about kissing?
Yeah.
Like, is it gonna end with a marriage and stuff like that? And he's like, well, just keep listening. It's a good movie. And it's just like, I don't want to do this. And then by the end of it, of course, he's like, then what happens?
Right.
Then what happens?
Classic.
So it's like it's got this joyful little game that we've
making
all
the
played
kid buy in
and seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly, but it's still playing the joke of, dealing with the framing device. This movie does the same kind of thing, not to the extent, definitely it goes big. It has the We Will Rock You, but it also has the Chaucer aspect, where it's like he's kind of always through the movie telling things and spinning things in a certain way, and you get the feeling at a certain point that he is kind of the screenwriter of the movie.
Well,
so
the screenwriter...
that's what it's not
has
into?
the guts to essentially name the land he's from with his last name, right?
Yeah.
Which is tells you what craft that the filmmaker thinks is his favorite.
Right. Gelderland, Helgeland.
Yeah. But I do think
Shakespeare in Love doesn't
No.
do that. It's about Shakespeare
Yes.
being in love. We're telling a story about this guy. It's anachronistic, but like Shakespeare isn't writing the play Shakespeare in Love.
no, it's not that. And I think if nothing else, you've made a pretty good case for like there are really lofty artistic reasons to render this time period and this movie this way that are not pretentious and that are actually clever and enhance the experience. Like, I'm not sure that if you did this movie exactly as it would have been done in history, like if you made a real period piece, whether we would have felt anything like how we feel about William. You know what I mean? Like, he would have been a character that would have been a lot more distant and remote instead of being like instantly recognizable and likable, right?
Oh, and we try, dude. And the wrong people try. Like, we've tried this shit with Robin Hood so many times. Almost every Robin Hood movie does this. Sense of Prince of Thieves. Then we had the 2010 Ridley Scott, I want to say. Yeah,
Was
Ridley
it the one that was
Scott
supposed to
version?
be Sheriff of Nottingham and then got reversed at the last minute? Yeah.
because Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
And then the most modern one with the what's his name, the Guy Ritchie guy.
Well, I see, and I think Guy Ritchie is essentially being asked to do anachronistic movies now because he's like, the pop culture filmmaker like that, but he doesn't.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have like high conceits. He just has like a what if they wear really fucking cool trench coats or something. You know what I mean? Like there's not as
What if it's like Robin Hood, but they're in suits?
right. There's no like
Cool,
they're in
right.
suits and they have like the equivalent of cars and like flame arrows and stuff. I just think that he's not trying to enhance the core themes as much with his anachronism, which is that's a lofty goal, isn't it?
It's hard to do.
Oh, I've never tried. I actually that's not true. I made a plumber western once, which you alone have seen.
Saw it.
Yeah,
I've seen it. It's very funny. It was the reason that I was like, "Hey, man, you should think about
being a
applying
crack
to
boy,
you
being a
fucker."
cracker.
Yeah.
So I have done anachronism, but it is very hard to do, and you have you're sort of out in the desert trying to figure out like, is this all gonna work or is it gonna be really stupid? That's the danger. Because I'm sure that as a first-time director, he must have been terrified at various points in this movie. Like, God, is this gonna be so dumb?
This
Is
so
gonna be so dumb.
Yeah.
What's gonna happen?
Well, after years of directing comedy,
Right.
I have always found that what plays in the room may not play for everyone.
And you have to live with that.
And your sensibility is important. No one's really going to have a magic, 8 balls telling you what the answer is. But what you can do as a director, and when you're trying to determine what's the funniest take, what joke are we going for, you trust the people who you know are funny. And
True.
if enough of those funny people and yourself laugh at it, it's probably funny.
I think there's that.
And so
and there's also
if people are around him telling him that's a very slow, that's a slow death to George Lucas though, because then if you get surrounded by yes people because you're fucking George Lucas, then everyone goes, oh yes, George.
I kind of wonder if this is just a personal experience thing, but I feel like at this point in my career I still always know when I'm being dishonest with myself about whether something is good or not. Do you know what I mean? When you have that little twinge in your heart that says, this isn't that good, and you ignore it because you're like, no, the math says and people are telling me it's good. I feel like at some point, sort of like when you stop listening to your conscience, it just goes away, and then you really don't know anymore if things are good or bad, and that's one of my greatest fears.
Yeah.
Also, so can I just make one more observation about this movie and we can wrap it up? So I really enjoyed the part of the movie that was the Jocelyn testing his love, which is
that's a fun
it's
series of montages.
It's fun, and also that's a thing that people do. People sort of lay out little traps to see if the other person is serious in dating and in romance, and it's not often rendered in movies. You know what I mean? These little games that we play to see well, if they really like me, they'll do this. If they really care about me, they'll do that. And I just was it was a trope that I'm like, I haven't seen that in a movie in a while, and I kind of miss it because that is still a thing.
Oh yeah, and it's there's two lines that do it back to back. When Chaucer talks to William after she says I want you to lose every single one of these, and then she says I want you to win now. And that's an impossible task.
And she's being terrible.
And he goes, there she is, the embodiment of your love, your Venus. And he goes, and how I hate her. And then he puts on his helmet and he rides into fucking joust. Because it's talking about the impossible task of changing one's stars, right? The overall theme of the movie being that ambition and hope ought to be unmovable. But when life gets in the way, it feels insurmountable.
I mean, and I think it's...
But you stick to your guns. That's how you you stick to trying to.
That's
get
the
what
lesson
you want.
that he certainly learned all
he
the time.
wants to he wants to believe, and then the second joke is that if you do that in a system that is not, you don't have any power, you're gonna get put in jail and probably killed unless someone Deus Ex makes you a knight.
Exactly. And just one more thing on the testing.
It does work out.
So if you're gonna make a movie about knights and then you're going to have a damsel, and you're going to have the knight try to win the damsel over, right? Like that's a prerequisite for this topic.
That's true, and usually they're just in a castle.
Right. And so in this case, it is a slight inversion because the female character recognizes that like part of what makes him great is also his biggest flaw, which is his ego, that he doesn't listen. Yeah. And so the test that she devises for him sort of flies in the face of that. And
is what if my ego
right. And that's the opposite of what you would see in most movies about knights. In most movies about knights, the test would be accomplish some great daring deed that requires courage. In this movie, it's like, no, your courage is basically ego, and you need to like set your ego aside if you want to win me over. And I thought there was at least something observant about that. It's not...
I think that's really smart to pick up because, like I said earlier, I was like, I don't exactly know what's wise about the... Like, I know it feels better than Jocelyn not being a target, but being the arrow. But if you think of the ego as the arrow, in other words, your wants and desires kind of thing, hers is the directional path that he must take up. He must charge himself not with his own arrow, but with hers. That's an interesting flip on the old, sexist suspicion of
so it ain't perfect, but at least there's some good ideas here, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a joyful. That's the one. It comes down to it. I'd say people watch it if you didn't enjoy it. Try to watch it again with these eyes and try to focus on how much good work is being done to try to make a tightly knit thing, and try to get past the cringiness of it because I know it can be cringy and for some people that just stops the movie for you. But if you just kind of go like, fuck it, it's just they know they're being stupid. They're not trying to make you go, oh, this is cool. Then it's a little less cringy, right?
I don't think it's
at least
that
I like
cringy.
To think so.
It's certainly not. It doesn't.
It's the number one thing that people have said to me about why.
I feel like that's this movie is very transparent, to use an ableism. Like it's not. It's not pretentious. It's very transparent. It's not trying to beguile you or be clever at all. It's like, no, we're just going to do it this way because it makes the emotions of the story rise to the surface more easily than doing it as an actual period piece. And like, look, we watch movies about robots and superheroes that wear leotards and stuff. So like, why is this a problem? You know what I mean? Like get off your high horse, audience that's offended by this. Like, get serious, Yeah.
I think we're doing a lot of work for like one guy. One guy in the comment section was like, I'm going to take these motherfuckers to task. Everyone else is like,
sure. And then there's the one guy who's in film school with us. Right. It's like, I wasn't really, it didn't work for me, I
have a fair share of stories from film school where that was true. I would be like, fun, right? And they'd be like, yeah, when I was 14.
Right. Like, like you're 18 now, so, congratulations on your wisdom.
Get the fuck out of here.
A giant boot kicks him out of the room. Yeah.
Let's sit down and watch your fucking movies then.
And it's just a person staring at camera for 6 minutes.
What a horror show! There's nothing more stupid than making people pay and already have like, oh shit, I'm gonna be so poor. I'm gonna be so poor. Everything depends on this. They're already agitated and egomaniacs. Put them all in a room and tell them to say the shit that they secretly wanted to say, but don't feel like they've had a platform
or that they've earned the right to.
And then just let them go hog wild. That's AKA film
right.
school.
So you feel like every room in film school is basically a one-way mirror, and there were a bunch of adults just watching, laughing their ass off at like the exercise.
Yeah, and every time you laugh at someone, even though because you can't help yourself, you immediately get insecure because you're going like, ah, shit, that's me though. They're me.
I'm
doing
the same fool
thing
this person is that I don't respect somehow. And yet, I don't learn lessons from that.
Sometimes things can be hypocritical.
I refuse to learn because I'm the special boy.
Maybe life is hypocrisy, and it doesn't mean anything.
It's like you're jousting right in my innermost thoughts, my friend.
Hey, I like to think that just like this movie, a lance is a blunt instrument, but a subtle nuance.
Okay. Wait, but just last thing. Why did the villain sharpen the joust at the end? Like, why did he do that? Can you?
Because he hates that William was getting all the attention. He hate his ego.
His ego.
He was too
Yeah,
far gone. His ego means he needs to win. He needs to win Jocelyn. He needs to win the jousting. He needs to be the best general
That
in the
makes
armies.
sense, but like,
And this guy's a lowborn. Go fuck yourself, lowborn. That's what he represents. Everything awful.
of course, he does. That's of course the answer. But my question also applies to like this character 5 seconds after he stabs this guy in an actual joust. What the hell is going to happen to him? Like they're not gonna be like, well, I understand because you wanted a thing and you didn't get it. I see why you're frustrated. They're gonna put his ass in the stocks. He's gonna die immediately after this, right?
I think he saw that the winds of time were changing, and he's just like a rat in a cage.
He's screaming into the void here,
lashing out. I mean, it's a dumb idea, but like most villains, I mean,
right?
It's a dumb idea.
This is the equivalent of when Sean Young and Ace Ventura just decided one last time to run after Ace Ventura and say, "Die, animal boy." Is that's what you're saying? Yeah. That's what this is.
Yeah, exactly. There's no rhyme or reason.
There sure isn't.
Just, you can't. Hey, some people can't. Some people can't change their stripes, but anyone can change their stars.
I've had it with you. That's it. Get out of here.
Yeah,
that is it.
So I won, right?
How could you not have? You're going to use catchphrases?
Not any of the other stuff.
All right.
Well, thanks for listening to me.
Of course.
Adam.
What a great time I had.
This is a bizarre thing we've chosen.
We have a weird life and a weird fortune. Just for the audience, if anybody's interested, I'm going to make a separate recording of the first 15 lines of the Canterbury Tale in the original English because I was forced to learn that. I was forced to learn that in college, and this is the last time in my life it will ever apply. So look for that sometime.
I like and subscribe. All right, that's it. That's an episode. Next time it will be baby.
You know what we'll be covering?
And I'll get to just sit here and not know what.
And I'll be the Miller's Tale. Do you know what we're covering? Are you excited to hear?
I'm gonna find out.
You are. It's gonna be Basic Instinct. Get ready.
Oh shit!
Get ready.
Oh shit! This is clear. Our movie choices are making very clear.
They really
lines
are.
in the sand of what we want to talk about.
I feel like at some point the audience is gonna start like, oh, I know what kind of movie we're gonna cover when it's an Abe. Yeah.
I wonder who's talking.
Right. Exactly.
About it. Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
It's hey, that might be a good thing. It might be like a yin-yang thing. It might be like.
Sure.
But it also might be a podcast, a little something for everyone. Or it might be for no one. So we'll see.
We're like chocolate and dark chocolate. Totally different flavors.
Totally different flavors. All right, I can't wait,
buddy.
man.
See you
Until
soon.
then.